Good morning. We are in Siman Tuf Mem Beis Sif Vav. So we had mentioned yesterday that the Shita of the Rambam is that if you eat on Pesach a Kizayis Bechdei Achilas Pras of Chametz, that's a Kizayis of Chametz mixed up with no more than 3 beitzim, 3 eggs worth of other food, that according to the Rambam, it is an Isser de Oraisa and you get Malkus. And the Rambam learns that from the pasuk of Kol Machmetzes. V'afagav de Gemar Mavur de Rabbanon lo darshi klal drasha de Kol Machmetzes v'rak Rabbi Elazar darish la ayin sham. So the question of the Rambam is that he's paskening apparently like the Rabbanon, and yet he's invoking the pasuk of Kol Machmetzes, whereas in the Gemara, the Rabbanan don't seem to darshan that pasuk, and only Rabbi Eliezer did. And the Arukh HaShulchan addressed that somewhat yesterday. Umizeh, and based on this question, Yatzalah poskim, some poskim conclude that Rambam posek Rabbi Eliezer, that unlike the way the Arukh HaShulchan explained yesterday, that the Rambam must hold like Rabbi Eliezer. However, the Arukh HaShulchan says, Niralanias daiti, it seems to me, Devadai Kainhu, that while certainly the Rabbi Eliezer darish miyitor umilashon kol, the Rabbi Eliezer darshans his drasha that you're chayev alav on chametz even if there's a kol shu, a tiny little bit in a mixture, and he learns that from the word kol, which is seemingly superfluous, kemavur b'gemara. Avol Rabbanan, but according to the Rabbanan, they are darshaning according to the Rambam, milishna de machmetzes, from the fact that the Torah used the word machmetzes, something which is leavening. De mashma, that implies lo chametz gomer, even something that is not complete chametz. V'hainu, and that would be al yedei taruvais, chametz in a mixture. V'raya brura lazeh, and a clear proof to this is Sharambam beperek tezvav mimacholas yisuros shepasak the davar sheyesh lo matir mafilu be'elaf lo basel. When he's talking about the general rules of mixtures, the Rambam says that something which is presently prohibited, but later on that will be mutter. So even if it's mixed up in 1,000, there is no bittul, there is no nullification. Because of Sham, the Rambam writes there, degam chametz hu b'mashahu mitam sheyuter la'achar Pesach, that the reason why chametz also is prohibited even in a minute amount, and there's no bittul, is because after Pesach will be permissible. Ayin sham. Because of Od, and he also writes the din davar sheyesh lo matirim eno ella b'mino v'lo al shelo b'mino, that this idea that it's not batul is only when the davar sheyesh lo matirim is mixed up in its own type, but not if it's mixed up in something else. Because of Bezel Shono. And the Rambam writes as follows: V'al tatam al chametz bepesach she'atorah amar kol machmetzes lo sochelu lefikach echmirbo. Don't wonder why we're so strict about chametz on Pesach, because since the Torah wrote kol machmetzes, so that's why we're strict. Kolomer dafilu be'eno mino. That's why, unlike other things that are only not batal, if they're min b'mino, when it comes to chametz, even min be'eno mino, it's not batal. And the Arukh HaShulchan says, ve'eno muvan. This is not understandable. Diladidei dalavhu b'kazayis b'chdei achilas pras ha'ein chomer b'chametz min ha'torah yosef v'shari yitzurin. Because according to the Rambam, that the isser of chametz in a mixture is only by kazayis b'chdei achilas pras. In that case, chametz isn't different than anything else. V'gamein lomer dekavana so mashich mira Torah b'nis chametz machmas davar acher. Don't assume that this chumrah about chametz he's referring to is, as we mentioned yesterday, that even if it was made into chametz from an external source, because so chametz gomer, at the end of the day, it's still complete chametz. V'od, and furthermore, and therefore there's no chiddush. V'od, and furthermore, the nischametz machmas davar acher, that when the source of the leavening was external, lav mehakra nafkale, we're not learning from this pasuk anyway. Ella min kol ochel machmetzes v'nichrasa, but rather from a different pasuk of Mavur b'Gemara. Ella vadai dachi perusha, but it has to mean this is what the Rambam means. The loshon kol machmetzes, that the term all leavening, mashma implies eza chametz shehu, any type of chametz, even kugon taruvos chametz, even a mixture of chametz. The after like a kares, even though there is no punishment of kares, because malkum, nevertheless, lav iko, there is a prohibition that gets you malchus. V'gam nichlal nischametz machmas davar acher, and also included in this is something which became chametz due to an external agent. Ella da'al zeba mikrasheni, but then we have another pasuk that comes in and says of kol ochel machmetzes v'nichrasa, shigam kares chayev bezeh, that when something is made chametz by an external agent, there is also a punishment of kares. Umistavr le'ukma rak bazeh, it makes sense to say that this pasuk is only putting kares on something that was made chametz by an external agent, v'lo b'taruvos, but not on a mixture of chametz. Shein svara lechayev kares al taruvos, because it doesn't make sense to say there's a punishment of kares on mixtures. Af bechazayis bechdei achilas pras. V'chei muchach lehedra b'Yerushalmi reish per gimel. This is also clear in the Yerushalmi. She'amar sham, it says here, Tifter explained that we're talking about b'chametz u'matzah shenes arvu, when chametz and matzah get mixed up. Uparach, and the Gemara asks, B'ma kayanan kayamim, what are the circumstances? Im b'shiru bo chametz, if in the mixture it's a majority of chametz, then chayev kares. Ayin sham, look at what the Yerushalmi says. Hari rak berubo chametz chayev kares. It's clear in the Yerushalmi that when it comes to a mixture, only if it's a majority chametz is the punishment of kares. Mishum da'amiyat batal harov, because the minority which is not chametz is nullified to the chametz, but there is no kares v'lo b'kzayis b'chdei achilas pras. Siv Zayin. V'nimtza comes out, the Rambam, according to the Rambam, Lashon machmetzes, the term in the Torah of machmetzes, kol el incorporates kol she'eno chametz gomor, anything that is not complete chametz. Umidepirsha Torah b'chametz kain, and since the Torah explained this in the context of chametz, afagav de b'shar degam b'shari surim kainu, even though it's true also by other prohibitions. But we're more strict about mixtures when it comes to chametz, because that is where the Torah specifically speaks about mixtures. Av Rabbi Eliezer dorish mikol. Rabbi Eliezer, who's saying you're chayev even on a tiny bit of chametz in a mixture, he's learning that for the word kol, which means any. Rabban lo darshi kol, but the Rabban are not learning anything from the word kol, kedisa b'gemara, as the Gemara says. But to Mihani, the Arukh HaShulchan says, I am bewildered. Ala Rambam v'ala Magid Mishnah say sigu al masha amar. Why the Rambam, the Magid Mishnah disagree with the Rambam. She'en kares betruvas kazayis b'chdei achilas pras. They question why the Rambam says there is no kares if you're eating a kazayis b'chdei achilas pras of chametz. Because after all, why are they bewildered? After all, the Rif also says just what the Rambam says. As we mentioned earlier, and we see clearly that the Rif holds like the Rambam. Anyway, we all know Rambam, when we come b'shitas a Rif, the Rambam always holds like the Rif. So why in the world do the Ramban and the Magid Mishnah find the Rambam so bewildering? Sifches. Avla Ramban v'Magid Mishnah v'Rova Poskim Kosvu de betaruvos chametz b'chzayis b'techei avchilas pras chayev kares. But the Ramban and a whole bunch of Poskim, they all hold that when you are eating a kazayis b'chdei achilas pras of chametz, there is a punishment of kares. V'chein b'chol ha'isurim shel chayev krisos, also by any other prohibition for which the punishment is kares. Mishen dechzayis b'chdei achilas pras halach l'moshe mesinai l'nyan achilas yisur shlo yisur yoser michdei achilas pras v'chinam b'taruvas, because we have halach l'moshe mesinai that in order to be called eating, you have to eat a kazayis b'chdei achilas pras, a kazayis within the amount of time that it takes to eat 3 eggs, and this same delineation would come into play when it comes to mixtures. Whereas the Rambam and the Rif would hold that this is only the amount of time you have to be considered to be eating, but Kazayis Bechdi Achilas Pras does not come into play in terms of kares in a mixture. When there's less than Kazayis Bechdi Achilas Pras in the mixture, Yesh min aposkim sheposku k'Rabbi Eliezer, mishum destama de'elo ovrim isa k'Rabbi Eliezer. Some hold like Rabbi Eliezer that there is a Torah prohibition of Malkus because the Mishnah seems to go like him. V'yesh lav b'zeh, v'yesh sheposku chum ve'en lav b'zeh k'divrei Rifa Rambam, v'yesh b'zeh din chatzi shir shasam min haTorah el she'en lo kan olav. But even those who don't hold like Rabbi Eliezer, who hold that there's no Malkus, would agree that there is a prohibition, because anytime you're eating less than the prescribed amount for punishment, there is still a Torah prohibition. Siftes. V'cholzehu b'taruvos is all talking about mixtures, where she'ena chametz nosen tam b'taruvos, where you don't taste the chametz in the resultant mixture. Kamo yavesh b'yavesh, for example, where two dry things get mixed up. Aval kishenosein tam, but where you can clearly discern the taste of the chametz in the mixture. Toli b'machlokas shebeder siman tzadiches itam ke'ikar deraisa or derabanan. This is all dependent on machlokas in Yeridea about whether taste is considered to be like the actual food is clearly present, and whether or not it's prohibited deraisa from the Torah or rabbinically. B'sham nispire the Rashi of Rambam sirulei the tam ke'ikar derabanan. And the sheet of Rashi Rambam over there is only rabbinically prohibited. Rabbi Tam Sfirulei Tam Kika Daraisa. Rabbi Tam holds it's Daraisa. V'chinu Das Roshva Torah Ein Sham. Lafika Chasav Kana Tur V'Zel Shono. Therefore, the Torah writes here. V'dafka She'em B'Teruvas Tam Chametz. This is all talking about where you don't taste the chametz in the mixture. Avlam Yeshbo Tam Chametz. If you can taste the chametz, Mechayiv and Olav, there is a punishment of Malkus. The Tam Kikar Daraisa, because he holds that the taste is a Torah prohibition. V'gam b'chadayis b'chdei achilas pras over karambanam agamish shekasav umarid nami she'in bem kazayis b'chdei achilas pras aval meish b'm kazayis b'chdei pras chayavon oleim. He also writes that if there is a kazayis b'chdei achilas pras, there would be a punishment of kares. Sif Yud. V'yesh nafka mina gedola b'deyos elu. There is a huge distinction that comes out between these different opinions. Le'inyan bittul, when it comes to nullification. Dinei chametz b'Pesach aser b'mashu, because chametz on Pesach is prohibited even in a tiny little bit. Because, of course, it's talking about where it's not in a mixture specifically. Because of Harash b'Perek Beis, the Erev Pesach achar chatzos batul b'samach mishum she'em bo kares. But when it is mixed up, the Rambam writes that on Erev Pesach in the afternoon, it is batal because at that point in time, there is not yet an Isser of Kares Ayin Sham. V'imkein, if so, kol min chametz, any type of chametz, she'ein bo kares, for which there is no punishment of kares, batal b'samech will be batal in 60. Lefizel La Rifa Rambam b'Teruvas Chametz Av Sheish Kazayis B'Chei Achilas Pras V'Av Sheish Tam Ke'ikar Batal B'Shishim Kivin She'ein B'Zeh Kares. Therefore, according to the Rambam, even if there is a Kazayis B'Chei Achilas Pras, even if you can taste the chametz, since there's no kares, it would be batal. Mitam Zehiter Maral Chametz Nuksha B'Samech. Therefore, the Maril says Chametz nuksha is chametz which is not made to be eaten, and it's actually barely edible. According to the Maril, it is batal b'samach b'she'ein kares, since there is no prohibition of kares on chametz nuksha. Amnam, however, harash shili akum kasav tam chumras chametz she'ein batal b'shisha mishum delo b'dili minei kuli shata in sham. But the Rush holds the reason why chametz isn't batal is because of the fact that people are not used to refraining from chametz all year long. Ulefiza kol min chametz b'mashu, and therefore any type of chametz would be a prohibition and no bittul, even if it's a tiny little bit. V'chein l'Ram that's vav b'chol sur shekasav tam chumas chametz b'mashu mishum davidav sheish l'matir gam kin aser b'chol min chametz. And the Rambam holds that the reason why chametz is usher even in a tiny little bit is, we said earlier, it's a davar shlish matirim, because it'll be permissible after yantif. So therefore, that refers to any type of chametz. Amnam ledaito, but according to the Rambam, yesh kula acheres, there is a different leniency. Kishataruvos hu bitavshil, when something is mixed up in a cooked food. Sha'at sheyavru yimei Pesach yiskalkel, which will not last. It'll get ruined by the time Pesach is over. Talking about times when there was no refrigeration. Vein dun bazed din davar sheish lamatirim. Therefore, it's not considered to be something that will be permissible after Pesach, because after Pesach, this won't be edible. Kavur b'yardei simin kavbeis will come in sif simin tuf samachzayin yispire don machmir mitaruvos ayin sham. We'll explain that later on that we're strict. Yispire b'siyata d'shmaya b'simin tuf mem zayin u'b'simin tuf samachzayin. This will be discussed elsewhere. The Isser the Chametz Nuksha lo hiskir harambam klal. The Rambam does not mention Chametz Nuksha again. That's Chametz which is not made to be eaten and is barely edible. The Rambam doesn't discuss it. Amnam yesh ledaik midvarav sheish lav v'chametz nuksha, but we can infer from his words that that would be prohibited from the Torah with Malchus. Nebegamor Isser the Seor havi chametz nuksha. The Rambam refers to Seor, which is basically the starter sourdough. That is considered to be chametz nuksha. Dinei begemara isa de seir havi chametz nuksha, but mishnah tran ezu seir lechavim kol shechsifu panav ka'adam she'amdu sa'arosav. And the Gemara describes seir as something that kind of looks like a person whose face is terrified. V'Rambam Perkei din yid gimel kasav v'chein mechsifu panav ka'adam she'amdu sa'arosav. Of karis, and the Rambam says that at that point the dough is prohibited to be eaten, but there is no karis. Karis there isn't, but the implication is there is a lav that would get you malchus. Otherwise, he should have said there's no lav whatsoever. Where does this lav come from? Yeshlomo, we can say, as we've said before, milosha machmetzes, from the term machmetzes. Shepirusha, its meaning is she'eno chametz gomor. It is not complete chametz. L'das harambam, according to the Rambam, k'moshe kasav, amma matur b'siv zeh kasav v'rif pasach chametz she'en lanu lav lo b'truvos chametz lo b'chametz nuksha ela issa d'Rabbanan. But according to the Tur, he says that the Rif would hold that there is no prohibition whatsoever in a mixture of chametz. It's not a kazayis b'chtei achilas pras, nor in chametz nuksha. It's only rabbinically aser. V'arei harambam posei gamchin chachamim. The Rambam, we know, paskins like the chacham as the Rif does. K'fi mashin esbayr v'gam kashelo misha Rambam yachuk al Rif ki yadua b'rov halachos v'in kasav aran sherif posei kain. And be a little bit strange now that it's coming out that the Rambam doesn't paskin like the Rif when he generally does. Umevi ochacha sheretruvos chamor minuksha k'nemucha b'gmar v'chim sheruvos potter koshkein benuksha ayin sham. And he says that a mixture is a stricter offense than chametz nuksha. And if the Rambam holds that there is no isser, from the Torah at least, on a mixture, then surely chametz nuksha cannot be a Torah prohibition according to the Rambam. Umamela, the Gamla Rambam yesh hochacha zu, and therefore this same proof as the Rif says would be true for the Rambam. V'afagav the Gor yesh misha omer de nuksha chamor teruvos b'kol makom tafso poskim ki idach man de amer teruvos chamor minuksha. Even though in the Gemara there is one opinion who says that nuksha is stricter than teruvos, but all the poskim hold like the other opinion that says that a mixture is worse. V'imkein tzarich lomer de gam kavanas harambam kenu. The gam lav nami leka, and therefore even the Rambam must hold that there is no lav when it comes to chametz nuksha mashizker kares, and even though he only said there is no kares mishum demarisham mikodem, because earlier in the Rambam he was talking about kares demshal k'dei hilach mil have chametz gamor, that if you left the dough enough time to walk a mile, it has already turned into chametz. Klomer v'chayiv kares is a prohibition of kares. Therefore, when he's contrasting with chametz nuksha, he says there is no kares. Aval hu hadin, because he was talking about the context of kares. Aval hu hadin dafilu lav leka, but the fact of the matter is there's not even any lav from the Torah whatsoever. And the Rush and the Torah also say that there is no lav when it comes to chametz nuksha. Sif Yud Beis. Ulinyan bal yera betaruvos, with regards to, is there a prohibition of not seeing chametz when it's in a mixture? Kasav harambam perek daled din ches taruvos chametz over maleh mishum bal yera bal yemotze. The Rambam says that there is a prohibition of bal yera bal yemotze. Upirish hamagid mishnah the mistama kavanas sheshbo kazayis b'tchei achilas pras. That's only talking about when there is a kazayis b'tchei achilas pras. Whereas we said before, and according to the Rambam, there would be a lav and malchus. B'samach ha'mashikasa perek aleph evish Rabbeinu Moshe HaKohen pish turav the kavanatzu gambish ebo kazayis b'tchei achilas pras. V'skimo zeh Rabbeinu Beis Yosef b'sifro kesef mishnah. And he does mention that Rabbeinu Moshe HaKohen says that it's even when there's not a kazayis b'tchei achilas pras. And the Beis Yosef in the Kesef Mishnah agrees with that. V'chol poskim v'kosvu milsa b'tayma debishlema ba'achilak shein kazayis b'achilas pras ein ochel k'fi shir achilas shenit lo Moshe b'Sinai. Avlin bal yira kivin sheishem kazayis chometz harei over bal yira. And he explains that when it comes to the prohibition of eating, so it's not considered to be eating a kazayis of chometz unless you've eaten a kazayis b'achilas pras. When it comes to the Isser of seeing, so as long as you have a kazayis of chametz mixed up, I don't care in how much, there's still a kazayis of chametz present, and therefore the Isser of bal yira and bal yemotze will take effect. Rashi holds also that there's a prohibition of bal yira in a mixture. Aval Rabbeinu Tam kasav shabasos like a bal yira. Rabbeinu Tam there disagrees. Because even the prohibition of eating of a mixture needed a special pasuk. But we have no pasuk to tell you also that there's a prohibition of seeing or possessing a mixture. But he says that only by eating, we need the chiddush because you're eating it in a mixture. When it comes to the prohibition of seeing, l'maisa, you're seeing and possessing a kazayis of chametz. Who needs a special pasuk for that? And he brings an example when it comes to tumah. If you have 2 half zaysim of a nevela of meat that was not shechted, and you put them both on a toothpick. So if you touch one, you're not tameh because you're not touching a kazayis of nevela. But if you pick up the toothpick, then you'll get the tumah of lifting, of carrying tumah, because that's considered to be lifting up the kazayis at once. V'chanami, similarly, kisha kazayis chametz mefuzar bena taruvos ba'achila patel fishen ochel ka'achas. If the kazayis of chametz is spread out through the mixture, then you will not get a punishment for eating because you're not eating it at once. Abba yirah chayav demasha etzlo kazayis chametz dumi demasa betuma. But when it comes to owning it and possessing it, the fact of the matter is you are possessing a whole kazayis of chametz. Similar to when you pick up the toothpick, that you are picking up a whole kazayis of nevela, even if it's 2 separate pieces on the toothpick. Because the fact of the matter is, when you look at it, you do see the entire kazayis at once. Sif Yud Gimel. As far as the prohibition of bal yira when it comes to chametz nuksha, but Rambam lo hiskir klal sheish bal yira benuksha. The Rambam doesn't mention any bal yira by chametz nuksha. Kamat mefurish b'dvarav she'enim bal yira. It would seem to be almost explicit in his words that there is no prohibition of bal yira. Sharei le'inyan seir she'avinu b'sif Yud Aleph Kosav Hareza Asr L'Ochlo Ve'en Chayav Lo of Kares, because he only wrote what we quoted earlier, that there's a prohibition to eat it, and there is no kares. If you're going to assume that the Rambam holds that there is a prohibition of bal yira, he should have said you have to get rid of it. Even though from Rashi it would seem that there is a prohibition of bal yira and chametz nuksha, did masisin delu ovrim yesham chametz nuksha va'ochlam Pirush Rashi she'ovim bal yira, because on the Mishnah that talks about chametz nuksha, Rashi says there's a prohibition of bal yira. Because makom la Rambam nira lehedish she'enu kain, it would seem explicitly according to the Rambam that this is not so. Be'emes l'dinein raya klami Rashi sherehu Pirush zela Rabbi Eliezer. But as far as halacha is concerned, we don't have a clear proof from Rashi, because Rashi was explaining the context of the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. But it seems even Rashi would agree that according to the Chavim, there is no bal yira whatsoever. Kamashikasav at Torah, as the Torah wrote. The Rabbanan, according to the Rabbanan, mutar la shosan bepesach, that you can leave chametz nuksha over until after Pesach. Have a wonderful day.